Hello, my name is Samanaz and welcome to another Samanaz Guide video. Today we're talking about tips and tricks for rogues in the new raid, Trial of the Crusader. This is not a boss strategy guide. I won't be covering the basic mechanics of each boss. I'm going to assume you're familiar with most of that already. I'll instead be talking about rogue specific strategy and preferred talent specs for each boss. I've got some footage from my live Twitch stream of each boss playing for you here while I talk about them so you can see the action. Let's get right into it with the first boss, Northrend Beasts. If you've got good gear for both combat and assassination, I'd suggest playing standard Hunger for Blood Assassination. This is the premier single target damage specialization for rogues, and this fight is almost entirely single target damage. If you're combat, or you're the Mutilate plus Blade Flurry version of Assassination, you'll have an opportunity near the start to do a nice Blade Flurry once one of the Snowbolts spawns. The Snowbolts are not like most enemies though. They have some strange targeting properties. If you want your Blade Flurry to hit 2 targets, you'll need to actually change target to the Snowbolt and have your primary target be the Snowbolt. If you stay targeted on Gormok, the Blade Flurry extra hits will just not happen and it will ignore the Snowbolt. When Acidmaw and Dreadscale come out, there isn't too much to do that's special. At first, Acidmaw will be stationary, and then every time the worms submerge, the worms will switch which one is stationary. Whichever worm is stationary will occasionally cast Sweep, which knocks away all the melee. You can use a carefully timed Vanish to avoid this knockback, or a Killing Spree as combat will keep you on the boss as well to not lose uptime. That being said, my raid usually has melee on Dreadscale first, and I don't have to worry about the Sweep knockback. This is much better for melee DPS. When the worms submerge and then re-emerge, their threat is going to be reset. You'll need to either Tricks of the Trade your tank, or be a little cautious when they pop up so you don't rip threat and die. Icehowl is the big baddie of Northrend Beasts and has 2 important tactics you need to know about. The first and most important one is to always adjust your character's position so you're attacking from maximum melee range. If you're at maximum range, you won't be hit by Icehowl's Whirl attack, which is a really big knockback and would reduce uptime on the boss. It can be helpful if your tank positions with their back to a wall so they aren't knocked around by Whirl to minimize how much the boss moves. Each time the boss moves, you have to adjust yourself to get to max range again. The second trick with Icehowl is way more fun. Rogues can use Vanish to negate the stun and knockback from Icehowl's Massive Crash ability. When Icehowl leaps to the middle of the room, just start running towards him. When the cast bar for Massive Crash is about 3/4 complete, hit Vanish, and if you time it right, you won't be stunned or knocked back. You can DPS for a few extra seconds while he chooses his target and turns and then charges, but be sure you don't get hit by the charge. Run away once he leaps backwards. Save a sprint or nitro boost if you're an engineer to be able to get right back onto the boss after he crashes into a wall. Okay, now for Lord Jaraxxus. This is a fight with some good multi-target damage opportunities, so combat and Mutilate plus Blade Flurry builds are the preferred talent specializations. These are the multi-target damage talent specs. For Lord J, we don't have to worry too much about his fight mechanics. If you get Legion Flame, press your Cloak of Shadows, that's about it. Don't stand in green fire that other players dropped in melee range. What we really care about is optimizing the damage windows for multi-target damage. That's Nether Portals and Infernal Volcanoes. Each of these abilities work a similar way. Either a Nether Portal or Volcano will spawn as an attackable mob, and as long as that thing is alive, it will spawn additional mobs. Your tank should drag Jaraxxus right on top of the Nether Portal or Volcano, and you can pop off with Blade Flurry, Killing Spree, and Adrenaline Rush, or just Blade Flurry plus Vanish for overkill if you are the Mutilate plus Blade Flurry Assassination build. The Nether Portal spawns exactly 20 seconds after the encounter starts, so a nice thing to do is to plan and make sure you have a long duration Slice and Dice already active when that happens. This allows you to spend all your energy on Fan of Knives as combat, or Mutilate plus Envenom as Assassination while the Nether Portal is active for maximum damage. After the Nether Portal, the party's over for Assassination, as you won't have another Blade Flurry ready for when the Volcano spawns, and you should just do your regular single target rotation. For combat, you can pop off again with more Fan of Knives when the Volcano comes out. Anytime you have 2 or more targets and you care about dealing damage to all of them, combat should just maintain Slice and Dice via 1-point finishing moves and spend as much energy as possible on Fan of Knives. If your raid kills the boss pretty quickly, you won't get a second Nether Portal. If you got a bit lower DPS, you'll have a second Nether Portal exactly 2 minutes after the first. This means your 2-minute cooldown Blade Flurry will be available again and you can go wild. If you're expecting a second Nether Portal, I suggest not using the Killing Spree glyph as combat. You will want to synchronize your second Killing Spree with the second Blade Flurry, so there's no need for the cooldown reduction glyph. If you are killing with only one Nether Portal, you should use the Killing Spree glyph, as this will allow you to send the first Killing Spree with your Blade Flurry and still get a second cast in before the fight's over. If you really want to try hard for Lord Jaraxxus, you can do a trinket swap before the encounter begins. Most DPS trinkets have a 45-second internal cooldown, which prevents them from triggering again after each trigger. If you just roll into the fight normally, your trinkets will pop right away, fade, then the Nether Portal will spawn, and you'll Blade Flurry and go wild, but not have any trinket buffs active. If you swap the places of the trinkets on your character screen, this will cause them to start their internal cooldowns and not activate for the next 45 seconds. If you do this approximately 25 seconds before combat starts with Lord J, they'll come off cooldown exactly as the first Nether Portal spawns, which is exactly when you want them to trigger. Well, this certainly is not necessary. What else are you going to do while the demon summoning role-playing event plays out each week? Next, we go to Faction Champions. This is actually my favorite boss in this raid because something I really like is doing encounters in ways clearly not intended by the developers. These guys all have a buff that says reduces damage taken by AoE effects by 75%. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to AoE them down. I think this is unironically the best strategy to beat this boss. My guild is able to kill it in under 3 minutes doing this. The goal is to have every player simply do whatever they can to deal the maximum total damage output. Ignore all this stupid crowd control and interrupt assignments and diminishing return rotations. That all makes it too complicated and is a low DPS. It's still fine and good to throw out an occasional stun, silence, disarm, or interrupt, but you don't need assignments or rotations for this, and definitely no crowd control that breaks on damage like sap or polymorph. Death Knights can spread disease through pestilence, and the disease damage isn't even technically considered AoE, so it isn't reduced. Warlocks can sit around and multi-dot every single enemy and not have that be reduced. Many classes have ways to increase their damage output on multiple targets that isn't technically AoE, and even for the classes that are just doing typical AoE, AoE on 12 targets with a 75% reduction is often still better total damage output than their single target rotations. For classes that really don't have great AoE, they'll still focus on single target damage on the healer enemies first. But Simon, won't the mobs just kill us if they aren't crowd controlled, you might ask? Well, that's where the rogues come in. Rogues can apply crippling poison, wound poison, and mind-numbing poison to all targets at once via Fan of Knives. If you are an Assassination rogue with a point in the Deadly Brew talent, you can apply all 3 debuffs just as one single rogue, with wound and mind-numbing poison on your weapons, and crippling applied via the Deadly Brew talent. If you want to do this, you would typically drop 1 point out of lethality to take 1 point in Deadly Brew. If you have multiple rogues, you can spread out the debuff duties, and each rogue can run 1 debuff poison and deadly poison in their other weapon. The purpose of these debuffs is to limit the amount of damage that enemies can deal to your raid. When a melee enemy is running at your casters or healers, it's remarkably easy for them to walk away and kite it if the mob is slowed by 70% from crippling poison. For the warlock, mage, shadow priest, and basically any caster enemy, if they have their cast times slowed by 60% from mind-numbing poison, they're basically just doing 60% less stuff. Finally, wound poison being applied to all enemies simultaneously will massively reduce the amount of healing the enemies can do. The rogue may end up at the bottom of the damage meter with these scuffed poisons, but make no mistake, the rogue is one of the most essential team members to making this strategy work. The last thing I have to say about faction champions is this old arcane bomb item works against them. It's pretty good, especially to get one on the pull to help clump up the enemies, so maybe stock up on some of those if you're struggling on faction champions. Twin Valkyr is the 4th boss of Trial of the Crusader. This is a 2-target encounter, so the preferred talent specs are Combat and Mutilate plus Blade Flurry version of Assassination, and the least favored is the Hunger for Blood Assassination spec. There's some interesting Light Essence and Dark Essence mechanic, which I'm not really going to go into full detail about here. Again, this is not a full strategy guide, just a rogue tips and tricks video. However, there is one interesting part about the Light and Dark Essence mechanics that I do want to talk about. When you take damage that is the same type as your essence, you absorb that damage and gain stacks of powering up based on how much damage was absorbed. When you get to 100 stacks of powering up, you get Empowering Darkness or Empowering Light, which gives you a 20-second, 100% damage buff, which is pretty nice. What you need to know is that there are a lot of abilities that actually grief your generation of powering up stacks. Any damage absorption, like Power Word Shield or the proc from Valinir, any resistance bonus to fire, since light essence is counted as fire damage, or resistance to shadow, since dark damage is counted as shadow, any damage reduction from effects like Feint or Vigilance, or increased chance to resist spells like from Cloak of Shadows. These will all reduce the amount of stacks of powering up you generate when you take same type damage. That is because all these effects are checked first, then any damage that remains checks to see if you have the same type debuff, then awards stacks based on that leftover damage. Generally speaking, using these defensive abilities here is good to help ensure people don't die when accidentally taking opposite element damage. Hyper-focusing on getting powering up stacks is very unlikely going to change an attempt from a wipe into a successful kill. That being said, it's worth knowing that all those defensive things are griefing your ability to get powering up stacks. So if you care about that, you're going to want to avoid those damage shields and resistances and Cloak of Shadows. Also, if you want to make it easier to see the floating orbs in this encounter, you can go into your game settings under Systems and then Graphics and go to Shadow Quality and set it to low. I don't have video footage of this for you, but it makes seeing the moving orbs on this encounter much easier. If only Blizzard could just design mechanics that are clearly visible in the first place, but that's a whole other discussion. Finally, we come to the biggest baddie of the whole raid, Anubarak. While your raid still needs one combat rogue to apply Savage Combat debuff, I would strongly suggest every other rogue to not be combat on this encounter. Take the standard Hunger for Blood Assassination build and pump damage into Anub'arak. The big problem with combat on Anubarak is that one of combat's main damage talents, Prey on the Weak, is turned off during the most difficult DPS check part of the Anubarak encounter, which is when he casts Leeching Swarm. Most of the raid will be kept at very low health, and Prey on the Weak will be disabled, making a combat rogue lose over 10% of their damage output, which is pretty massive. When you do get into the Leeching Swarm phase, regardless of your talent spec, save your Cloak of Shadows. If you get targeted by Penetrating Cold, immediately pop your Cloak of Shadows to remove the debuff. This is a really scary damage debuff that goes on random raid members, and being able to just remove it instantly will make your healers love you. Combat might be able to win on the in-game damage meter by popping all their cooldowns and doing some big Fan of Knives to the Burrower ads in Phase 1, but I think this generally is not helping your team to kill the boss. Plenty of other classes should be able to efficiently handle the ads with little or no single target DPS loss. Combat sucking in the most difficult part of the encounter is a massive L in my opinion. The only time I would want to be combat is if your raid is struggling to kill each wave of burrowers before the next one spawns. And that's it. We're at the end of the second week of Trial of the Crusader, and these are the best tips and tricks I know of to help you out on your rogue right now. I hope this has helped you to improve, and good luck on getting those big cloaks for clearing the raid without any wipes. Before I end the video, I want to tell y'all I have a great video covering the essentials of rogue DPS in raids that is probably worth checking out. If your damage isn't where you think it should be, you're almost certainly messing up one of these essentials. I can't tell you how many times people have asked me for log reviews or tips to improve, and they're just messing up these simple yet essential gameplay elements. It's linked in the video description, so watch that one after this one if you're looking to improve. Also, you can pop by on Twitch to catch me live 5 days a week, or join Discord. I've got a lot of resources to learn about rogues on Discord. Both Twitch and Discord are linked in the video description. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.